How's everyone doing? I'm gonna call you chat because I mainly stream on this YouTube channel, but this is going to be a YouTube video rather than a stream, a regular upload. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be tearing open this G&G ARP556. If you don't know what the ARP556 is, it's the 556 variant of the ARP9, which is a 9mm of the 556 M4. It's a bit of a mess. Basically, to describe it quickly, G&G created a gun called the ARP9, which was an M4 platform chambered in 9mm. And the thing is, the gearboxes on the ARP9s were really good. And the externals were G&G's legendary polymer externals, and they were pretty darn good as well. So people would buy the ARP9 and then use a G&G lower receiver to convert it into a 556 variant, into a standard M4. So G&G decided, let's capitalize on that, and created the ARP556, which is an ARP9 that's pre-converted back to 556. It's basically a standard M4 with a couple of variations, but conceptually it's the same. And what we're doing today is I'm going to open this thing up, walk you through the different parts and their functions, and we're going to just talk about a bunch of those things. The reason why I'm doing this is because I exchanged the barrel with a new wide bore barrel that I'm testing, and I saw that it's doing low power. Not by much, but this thing's supposed to chrono in at pretty as close as I can get to 1 joule, which is my field limit, and also the standard CQB field limit here in Germany. And it's doing more like 0.7 to 0.8 joules. And what's in here right now is an M100 spring. So I'm going to grab an M110 or a really shitty M120 spring and put it in instead. And we're gonna see whether we can improve the power that way. But in the process, I'm gonna kind of walk you through a couple of different parts of an AEG. And for that, we're going to switch over to this view. Teching takes a while. I'm probably gonna edit it down some, but I'm gonna be sitting here for probably at least an hour working on this thing. Good, let's crack on. Now we've got our ARP556 here. For any teching, the first thing that we'll want to do is take off the upper receiver section. We can achieve this by punching it out. How do we punch it out? First off, there's a pin right here. I'm gonna use a hammer and this little bit here, which gives me a nice surface, to halfway punch the pin through. On most replicas, you'll just need like a screwdriver and apply some pressure down. You don't need a hammer. However, this works every time without any issues. And so this is my go-to when I'm ticking at home. No messing around. Usually I just pulled the pin through all the way on this side. Here it is, right here. I'll probably mark it out for you. And now something you'll see with a lot of M4s is when you're taking the receiver off, it'll get stuck like this. And you actually have to pull the charging handle back a little bit in order to slide the upper receiver off completely. We're going to focus in on the upper receiver for a section, because we're going to get to one main functional bit, and I'm going to talk you through some other bits inside the upper receiver as well. First off, this one has markings. This is the German F in a pentagon marking, which classifies this as a standard airsoft gun, an air gun, which can go up to 7.5 joules, but obviously that's not allowed at fields. It means it's above 0.5 joules, which is the top upper limit for full auto here in Germany. Now, when I flip it up like this, you can see right here, this is our hop unit. This slots into your magazine and feeds BBs in. And then, one second, I'm just gonna pull the hop unit out for a second. It's a little fiddly in this case, but that's okay. Now, this is a very standard look for a hop unit. If you get one, it'll probably be a little less fancy without this here. But basically, what happens in theory is this sits into the magazine, pushes the feed lip back, and allows BBs to come up in here. They will rest in here in the chamber. We can call that the chamber. And then here, through this hole, the nozzle of the gearbox moves back and forth and pushes the BB into the barrel, essentially really chambering it. And then air gets expelled through the nozzle and fires the BB out of the barrel. And now, in order for that air to actually propel the BB, it needs to have appropriate seal against the nozzle, because essentially it's not just air speed, but air pressure that accelerates the BB. That's what the spring is there for. If this unit slides too far forward inside the upper receiver, like so, then there's no proper seal anymore. And so the spring will tension it against the outer barrel and push it back onto the gearbox after every shot, to make sure that every BB gets shot with a proper seal. That's one of the reasons why, if you're building a really high full auto build, a really high speed full auto build, like say a DSG or even a triple sector gear build, you don't want to rely on a spring like this, but you're actually going to want to use barrel shims to shim it in place so it doesn't move at all. This increases wear on your hop unit, which is one of the reasons why you'll want a CNC hop unit in that case, even though it also increases wear on all of your components in turn. I'm not going to disassemble it further, but there are a few things you need to know. This is your charging handle. It's on a spring, and typically mounted to it is a fake bolt cover, like this here. You can see it here. This is the fake bolt cover. You can see when I move the charging handle, it moves back and forth. The fake bolt cover is behind the dust cover. You can see if I apply a little bit of pressure and pull the fake bolt cover, then the dust cover will snap open. We're gonna keep it closed for demonstration purposes though. You can also see the charging handle is mounted to a spring. The spring is what pulls it back and forth. Now this is not a very strong spring because you have to be able to actuate the charging handle without any resistance. This means that this spring will wear out very quickly. Do not pull your charging handle back more than like so, more than 1 or 2 centimeters. Because you will wear out the spring and it'll stop going all the way back to the front. Also, please note that in this case it screws in. On some cheaper models, like the SEMA Sportsline models, it won't screw in but hook in. Some other brands also use proprietary types of screws or different types of screws, hex screws, or yeah, in this case it's just a standard Phillips head, all good. But yeah. Then on the outside, we've got ourselves our handguard. Not every model has to have a handguard. The handguard is an aesthetic piece. It's not functionally integral. You will want one though, unless you're running a pure Speedsoft gun. Even for Speedsofters, just an outer barrel is a little bit uncomfortable. The outer barrel slots into it and is held in by the delta ring of the handguard. The delta ring is functionally integral. It's necessary to hold the outer barrel in place. In some cases, you may even want to put barrel shims inside in order to keep the outer barrel locked in place because there's too much play otherwise. And again, it's important because the outer barrel is what the spring on the hop unit pushes against, holding it in place. If the outer barrel has play, so does your inner barrel, and as a result, your gun will be inaccurate. Those are the basics of the upper receiver, and I'm sorry that I couldn't visually demonstrate them very well in this case. However, in my defense, please understand, because, well, the ARP556 is a beautiful gun, and it's very fun, but it's full metal, and this is Loctited on there in several places, and getting it off requires me to use a hammer. And I do not want to do that because it's metal, and if I use a hammer on it, I don't have a rubber mallet, so if I use a hammer on it, then it's gonna get damaged, it's gonna get burned, and I don't want that because I don't actually want to change anything about it. Focus will now be on the lower receiver. I'm pushing the body pin back in for ease of use. It won't be in the way anymore from here on. So you can see it's just back in place. That holds it in place. Nothing to be concerned about. Let's get down to business. First step is removing this here, the stock. In this case, it's got a PDW style stock. In some cases, you may have a buffer tube, but the concept is the same. You have an outer stock that sits against your shoulder that's positionally adjustable on an inner tube that mounts to your receiver. I'm going to just pull it off, and you can do the same to your stock. You can pull it off. Once you do this, it will reveal your buffer tube, which in this case is open to the back. Now, I don't know how well you can see inside this in the dark. You can't at all. Then you'll have to give me a second, because I will take my phone and illuminate it for you. Because what I want you to see is that there is actually, behind all the cabling, a spring at, not a spring, a screw at the bottom of the buffer tube. That screw mounts straight into your gearbox. It doesn't mount into your lower receiver like it seems. It mounts into your gearbox. To be exact, it mounts into the spring guide. And it prevents the spring guide from moving around on some replicas. You want to undo this. Don't try to take your gearbox out without it. So I'm just going to do that right quick. I'm taking a very long Phillips head screwdriver. Some brands, full disclosure, some brands like Tippmann don't use Phillips head screws in the stock on their AEGs. However, those brands are shit and you shouldn't buy them, with the exception of Tippmann, because Tippmann... So here's the thing, I have mixed feelings about Tippmann, and I'm planning to make a review of one of their guns in the future, but that's not on my current active to-do list. It's not a priority. So we're gonna postpone that. Once I've undone the screw, I'm just gonna shake it out and the buffer tube will easily just come off. I'm going to place these to the side for safekeeping, so that I can make sure that I don't lose them. Good. Now we've got our upper receiver here, and you can see I've got it on the other side. That's because the next bit I'm going to remove is the mag catch. Now the mag catch, actually, it's not that bad, but it mounts through a ring inside of your gearbox, and I'll show that to you once I've got it out. 1 second, I do require a screwdriver for that. I'm not good at gauging bit sizes, by the way. So you'll see that there's a bit of trial and error involved with that, but that's okay because these are my personal replicas. I'm not selling these to anyone. I'm not being hired to do this. Right. So, let's talk about the mag catch. I'm going to put it back together right quick in order to both safekeep it and in order to demonstrate the way it works to you. Because it's very, very simple. And if I'm not mistaken, the way it works is actually perfectly identical to real firearms. Quite simply, it mounts into your receiver like so. From a top view, like so. And then the spring sits against the ring of the gearbox that you can see in there. See? This silver ring, that's what the spring mounts against, and it mounts in between that ring that sits here and the button itself, and holds it in that position. So when a mag gets slotted in, it catches right here. This is the mag catch, and this is the mag release, essentially. So when you actuate the mag release, it drops the mag out. Pretty straightforward, very simple. Make sure you don't lose these parts because they get very annoying when you do. Good. Next step. On this replica, the next step will be punching out this receiver pin. Find the side that's less far in. In this case, you can see this side slightly protrudes, and we can see that it's slightly knurled. I'll demonstrate that to you in a second. But first, I will take a screwdriver or a punch, place it on top, and hammer it gently which will very easily remove this pin. And you will see that one side of it, unlike the other, is knurled. In this case, that's this side. It has some knurling on it, which will prevent it from going all the way through the receiver. Make sure to keep that in mind when you're working with this part. Good. On some replicas, the fake bolt catch will actually prevent the gearbox from coming out because it continues all the way through. In order to ascertain this, check the magwell, and right where the red cable is in this case, you will see a silver metal stick going all the way through that moves when you push on your mag catch. This is usually the case on features that have a bolt hold open feature, in which case you pull back the bolt, it catches on the bolt catch, and stays open while you mess with your hop up. This gun does not have that, so we can continue. Next step is opening up the motor grip and removing the motor. I'm using my long ass screwdriver again because I like my long ass screwdriver. It is my favorite Phillips head screwdriver, but generally any screwdriver will do. It does not need to be a certain length. You can see that it's already starting to lift as I undo the springs. That's because the motor is kept under constant spring tension. This is necessary for its function. Don't undo this. Now I can simply pull this off. In the center, you can see here that there's an adjustment screw. That screw mounts against the bottom plate of the motor, and it's usually a flathead type. You can turn it in and out in order to adjust the height of your motor. When we open the grip, you can see that inside the grip we have the base plate of our motor, as well as a red and black cable. You can remove these cables by simply gently pulling up, away from the body of the gun on them. This may take more effort in some cases. And then when that's done, you can pull out your motor. I'm going to place the motor to the side because it's a nice motor and I don't want to lose it. And now inside the motor grip, you will see there are once again screws at the bottom. This is why I have my long screwdriver, because there's a lot of screws that are hidden away. Most guns will have 2 screws inside the motor grip, across from each other like so. In some rare cases, people feel the need to place all 4 in, and I respect those 4 people, but I am not that diligent. That's because 2 screws are usually plenty. You don't need more than that. The other 2 are just reassurance, and in some cases, if you over-tighten them, can actually increase stress. A lot of motor grips are also actually built to only have 2 screw holes. So, you know, I respect people who put 4 screws in their motor grips, but I cannot be bothered to do the same. So, I'm doing this off camera because it's easier that way, but I'm just undoing those screws. And then once those are undone, I can simply pull the grip away. I'm gonna shake it a little to get the screws out. Here, you can see I've got them here. I'm placing them to the side. And now, if you look at this, you can see the cables go into these holes on the motor grip. I'm going to gently and carefully pull them out because at the end they are hooked, which means they will hook into these holes, and you have to make sure to pull them out without bending them too much. If you overbend these tabs, they will snap and you'll have to resolder them, and it's a ton of effort and I don't want that. So I'm being careful with it. Now, we're almost finished, but not quite. Most guns only have a single selector on the left-hand side of the body, this one. If this is the case, you can simply set it to somewhere in between safe and semi, and begin pulling out your gearbox. This is not the case. This gun has an ambidextrous selector. They are a pain in the ass, and I hate them. If I had a cover for the other side and an option to this, I would not be using this. I do not, therefore I am. In the case of an ambidextrous selector, the rod that connects the two goes through the gearbox, so we have to take it off before beginning our work on the gearbox. Now, you can see I've taken the screw out of the selector. A lot of the stock selectors have internal screws, the fancier ones have external ones. But what they have in common is that you want to be careful with them. Because what you will see when I lift this up is inside it is a spring right here. And underneath that spring is a tiny bearing ball, which is what makes the selector clicky. If you lose this ball, you will not have a clicky selector. Therefore, once again, be fucking careful with it. I will carefully and gently place it to the side in a secure storage. And I will remove the other selector. Now, again, be careful, because many ambidextrous selectors will actually have two of these. And if they do, you don't want to lose them. Like I did. I already lost the other ball bearing. Now, there's only one more pin left until we can get out our gearbox. This rear body pin. So once again, I will take my hammer and my push tab here and gently tap it with the hammer. That should be all I need to do in order to flip it over and ease it out on the other side. This one goes out all the way. Many will not. Many will simply be captive. Others have to be unscrewed. This one just comes out. And with all of that said and done, we can finally easily release and pull out our gearbox. Hallelujah. At this point, I take the lower receiver and I set it aside. And this is a G&G gearbox. You can see the sign. This means that there is a Perron hybrid ETU unit built into this, which I installed myself. They do not come stock with those. Next, I take out these selector bits. They too need to be set aside. There will be one cog on each side like this, and then the cogs here in between are connected and I can simply pull them off. This system is proprietary. Not all ambidextrous selector gearboxes are the same. I know it's a pain in the ass, but that is how this works. Now, let's talk parts for a second. What we have here, this is called the selector plate. You can see that it has a little nub here. Onto this nub normally would go a spring that is connected to an arm that comes out of the gearbox here, which is the cutoff lever. This is only on traditional triggers units and on some electronic trigger units. Because this has an electronic trigger unit, it does not have that. However, if you want to see what that looks like, you can just take a look at an old stream I did where I opened up an APS Silver Edge gearbox, which has a traditional trigger unit. Now I'm just gonna get to work and start opening up all of the screws on here. Normally, most actual decent gearboxes open up on the other side. The screws will go on the other side of this. This is non-standard. This is G&G's proprietary gearbox. They're ambidextrous gearbox. If you can avoid getting a G&G ambidextrous selector gearbox, avoid it. get a regular gearbox because they're better. They still have these little tabs here, these screws that you can screw in and out and put shims on in order to seat it perfectly within your receiver. But the screws go onto the right side, and they don't have a production error that I'm about to point out, as well as single selectors are just better than ambi selectors. They just work better. Now, I kind of fucked up when I assembled this thing, because I accidentally bought a front wired ETU unit instead of a rear wired. So when I flip this over now to open it, you will see that my wires actually run across here. Just gonna undo that for a second. In most cases, these will come out the back. There is an opening at the back. I will show you once it's open. Now, how do you open this up? Take a screwdriver, get it into an opening. There will be openings here, here, and in some cases this will also be empty because in this case it's an ETU, so I don't need a physical stop, but normally this would be your safety lever. And I can simply get my screwdriver in there and apply some angular pressure like this and begin opening it up. And then once I've got it somewhat open, I'm placing my screwdriver into this rear hole and pushing it down while pulling up the receiver shell, like so. Now, you can see this is under tension, so I will carefully and slowly pull it out while maintaining pressure. This is your main spring. This is where all the force of your gun comes from. If you're not careful with it and you don't do it this way, either one of these parts can go shooting off across your room. And with that, we can begin our takedown and explanation. So, step 1, spring guide. This part in the back is the spring guide. It mounts in like this, and it's literally that, a spring guide. You can see there's very little distance between this and the piston that the spring goes into. It prevents the spring from coiling down and getting attached to the gears, going up too much. It just guides the spring. And on top of that, you can see the gearbox has an indent here. It's open to the back. That's because this has threading on the inside. And that's where you screw your buffer tube into, which will also then lock it in place against the back of your gearbox and prevent it, and even more prevent the spring from flopping around too much. We will take this up and set it aside. Next, let's talk about the compression unit. Your compression unit consists of several parts. This is what it looks like. Firstly, we have the nozzle assembly. That consists of your actual physical nozzle. This one is a plastic one. I believe it is a nylon nozzle. I'm not 100% certain. As well as the tappet plate. The nozzle will mount onto the tappet plate, and the tappet plate will be pulled back and forth, moving the nozzle. This happens with this here. This is a knob on your so-called sector gear, which will pull back the tappet plate and thereby retract and push forward your nozzle as the gear turns. In order to pull it back, you will have this tappet plate spring. It literally just hooks onto the bottom of your tappet plate like so. Wait, let me get a better background. And then there will be a nub at the front that the other end hooks onto. The nozzle will move on top of this cylinder head. That's what we call this part. This is the cylinder head. You can see this one also has a sorbo pad at the back of it. And this functions very straightforwardly as, oh dear, as the head of the cylinder in which the piston moves around. The piston consists of two actual parts. The piston itself, this one has several steel teeth in order to prevent it from getting damaged, and the piston head. Now, this piston head is damaged, which may actually be the reason why we're getting low power out of this gun, because I imagine that this compromises compression quite a bit. Compression is how we describe how well it traps air pressure. If I put the piston in and push it back and forth, then I can feel some air coming out of the end, and if I block it and push on the piston, then it should be difficult to move forward. This still has compression, but I can feel that the compression is weakened because the piston head is knackered, and frankly, it would be irresponsible to keep using a ruined piston head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my parts bin. So, after testing a couple out, I've ripped the piston head off an old SEMA piston and put it on here instead, because there wasn't really anything else I could do. I don't have anything better. The SEMA pistons look like this. They're not very good, but it's better than nothing for the moment. And I get proper compression with it, so I'm okay with that. Now, I doubt that this is the reason why we were getting low power, but either way, it is what it is for now. Now let's see what else we have in here. Next we have the trigger unit. In this case, that's a PCB, a printed circuit board. There are traditional trigger units. I'll show a diagram, a picture how they work later. As well as our trigger. I'm using a red Retro Arms trigger. Retro Arms is the brand that makes these. It's CNC'd and anodized aluminum, and I like it a lot. Next we have our gears. Our gear, there's 3 gears. The sector gear, spur gear, and bevel gear. The sector gear is what actually moves our piston back when we turn it. It has a set amount of teeth, and this chip here, as well as on the bottom, you will see that it has a little bit of a nub standing out right here, which is what tells your trigger that we're done. That's a full cycle. Next we have the spur gear. I think you can tell why it's called a spur. And it's very straightforward, really. And then next we have the bevel gear, which has a small set of teeth that interacts with the spur gear and a large set of teeth that interacts with the pinion gear on top of your motor. Now, I'm not doing anything with these. The amount of grease that's still on them is perfectly appropriate for its use, and I don't need to replace it. And they are already shimmed. Shims are little metal discs that you can see, for example, right here around the stem of the gear. And they are used in order to make sure that the gear sits tightly inside and doesn't flop around up and down when you shoot, because that increases wear and it can make teeth break off, and it's just not a good time all around, so we avoid it as much as possible. Now I can pretty much put this gun back together already, because we're not actually doing much in the way of maintenance today. The discovery of that threaded piston head was purely coincidental and not at all the point of this video. But it's good that we found it, of course. So now we've got the gearbox mostly reassembled, and I'm just going to grab an M110 or M120 spring from my spring bag. So the closest thing I can find is a TFC M120 spring, which is okay because I think that with how short the barrel is, that's probably still gonna be within the limit. So now what you can see is I've added a chip here. This clip will hold the anti-reversal latch in place. The anti-reversal latch basically ratchets against the the bevel gear and prevents it from turning back, which would break down our motor and could even send back feedback, negative flow to the battery and damage it or even cause it to explode. It's also really finicky and likes jumping out, so I encourage everyone to get themselves a clip like this to hold it in place when you're working with the gearbox. Now, I'm going to insert the spring, but not fully, and I'm going to actually take the upper half of the gearbox already and hold the cylinder in place through the upper half. Because once this is in, I need to keep it under pressure as I place the upper half of the gearbox on top. At this point, I can pull out the clip and keep maintaining pressure, mind you, and use a small screwdriver to move around the different gear stems inside to make sure that it seats properly, as well as the trigger. And I can press it down a little bit to make sure everything goes in place. And you can see it closed up totally fine, perfectly. I'm gonna lay the wires across again in order to make sure that they don't go anywhere. Flip it around and begin putting in my springs. I'm accepting this. I'm gonna say that's good enough for me. And begin putting back in my gears that I need for the ambi selector, which is a feature that I absolutely hate and that I don't understand why they even include it, but it is what it is, it exists, so I have to deal with it now. You can see that the gears helpfully have markings. Those will line up on both sides, which means I don't need to be too worried. This gear also has 2 T's marked, that the Mark IIs on this side can easily go in between. So it's all nice and easy and straightforward. Now, I'm holding it in my hand because it can be a pain. Alright, so now for the receiver, I'm going to first put my wires through the motor grip hole and then the rear wires through, well, the rear hole underneath where the buffer tube mounts. If they will, there we go. And fortunately, G&G receivers are made with very good tolerances, so they will simply slot in place 99% of the time without any extra effort, which you cannot expect from every brand of receiver, and which is one of the reasons why G&G are as popular as they are. You may not be aware of this if you are not much in the airsoft community, but G&G are a hugely popular brand. So, wait. One second, I used the wrong tip. Need to use this one here. There we go. You can see I can move this receiver perfectly fine now. Now I can flip it over to the other side. Not receiver, selector, of course. My apologies. And I can install this selector here. Put through my body pin. Clicks in place nicely. That's a feature. Not every gun has that. Again, G&G's tolerances. There's a reason why I shell for them as much. And from here, I'm basically just reversing the process from earlier. Next is my grip, which I will lay my wires into and pull on them on the other side, very gently, mind you. to make sure they do in fact go all the way through. And now I'm gonna put my screws in here. Now I've gone off screen and installed the motor grip, because again, much easier to do off screen. And now I'm gonna take my motor, and now I'm gonna have a look at the wires, and I can see my red wires in front and black wires in back. So I'm going to look at the back of the motor and see that these are marked with polarity, and I'll put that in correspondingly to that to make sure that I have the correct wire in the correct end. If you reverse the polarity on the motor, not only will it damage your gearbox because it'll spin the wrong way because it's a simple electric motor, it might also just not work if it's not a simple electric motor but a quite good electric motor. Or it'll just draw an ungodly amount of amperes from your battery in an attempt to make sure that it can turn the gears, which it never had a chance of doing, and it'll blow up your battery. So make sure you install your motor the right way around. I'm being a little over the top when I say it'll blow up your battery, but it'll definitely cause some damage. An exploding battery is a very much worst case scenario though. Now, it took a bit of searching, but I found the lost motor screw. So that's great. Obviously, would suck if I hadn't, but here it is. And next we are going to grab our body pin. Here, the one you remember from earlier. And use a hammer to very gently put it back inside the receiver. Maintain good control, be cautious, be gentle. You don't want to scuff up your receiver unnecessarily. You may be into that look, but I assure you, you're probably not going to enjoy it for long if you just have scuff marks all over an otherwise good looking receiver. Now, this simply slots in right here. Ta-da! Now we flip it over to the other side. And this part's a little finicky. We place the screw around the stem. And then we take our button and press it on top. And we have to maintain pressure on this button while we put the screw in. Okay. Or if you have a magnetic screwdriver, put it onto your screwdriver and screw it in. And you need to get at least part way before you can release the button and let the screw hold it in place. But that's a working release. While the hop unit's not installed, I can take my test mag and just demonstrate right quick. This does in fact work. Here, test mag. You can see here's where the mag release will hook into it. Click. Now you can see when I hold it like this, there's BBs in there. That's why I'm not doing it before installing my hop unit. That's how it'll sit on there. And now if there was a hop unit there, those BBs would feed in, and then the nozzle moves back and forth on each shot and chambers a BB. And also, just for demonstration, gravity check. So it works. Now I'm gonna push out the front pin. And now I can mount my upper receiver. I have to put some pressure on my bolt catch to slide it on this time. And I need to pull back the charging handle over the nub at the end in order to get it on properly. Ta-da! We've got that on. Now all that's left is the stock, which is of course quite straightforward, just like before. We take our stock bits, put the wirings through, and just slide it on, nice and easy. And then now I'll put the stock on. Now this is configured to run 11.1 volts of power. But I'm not going to test it right now. And that's because it is 11 at night. And I can't reasonably shoot this thing at 11 at night. So I'm sorry, but you're going to have to wait. Well, that's gonna be it from me, folks. You've seen me crack it open, fix it, work on it, and I mean, for those of you who are interested, here's the finished result. Here's the side with the trades. I'm pretty happy with my ARP556. Either way, thank you very much for watching. I realized that this video isn't perfect for like a teching tutorial, but if you've got any questions and you think I might be able to answer them, and I reckon regarding AGs, I'll be able to answer relatively many questions. Leave them down there in the comments and I'll happily come back and answer them anytime. It's fun for me, so go ahead. And yeah, on that note, thank you very much for watching. I'm Stardust, you're Stardust, we're all Stardust, and I'll be seeing you next time. Goodbye.